The DC Extended Universe is officially over. 16 movies have been made, and today I will be ranking them all. Hey everyone, welcome back to our movie news. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom released last week, and so that concludes the DCEU. So I thought, as we are coming to the end of the year, this would be an appropriate time to rank the entire DC Extended Universe. I did one a few years ago, and my views have changed quite a bit. Some films have aged well, but others after another viewing have become far worse. Now, I want to make it clear this is just my own rankings. I'm not stating mine as a fact or saying anyone else's is wrong. This is just my opinion. The way I rank these films are simply which films would I prefer watching. I'm not judging this like how old film critics would, like going into the camera angles or the foreshadowing or anything like that. This is a super simple list where it is just which movies do I prefer watching to others. And we are going from worst to best. So let's get started. In 16th place, we have Birds of Prey, a movie that I had to force myself to get through. I didn't care about any of the characters, and the story was very dull. The action felt so overly choreographed that it looked more like a dance than a fight. And the movie just felt random to me. There didn't seem to be any point to it. It was a boring movie about characters I didn't care about at the start of the film or at the end of it. Overall, a movie that I found forgettable, and I don't want to see another DC movie like that. In 15th, Wonder Woman 1984. A film I was very excited to see, but another movie that completely changed the perception of the character. From a badass and ruthless warrior to this weak, afraid of her sword and shield character. Another movie where they did their very best to make the main character weaker, and I have no idea why. And some of the running shots in this movie were dreadful. They looked like something you would find in a low-budget 2000s movie. But I did like Pedro Pascal as Maxwell Lord, and I actually cared more about his character than Wonder Woman. This film just felt like a total contradiction to the Wonder Woman many had fallen in love with, and so for that, this movie sits in 15th place. In 14th, we surprisingly have Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the final movie in the DCEU, but one of the weakest for me. I said this in my full review, but this felt like an extremely surface level movie. I had really liked Aquaman before this film. They changed the perception of the character from a joke to a really cool character. But this movie turned him back into a joke, and somehow lost most of his intelligence. It's a movie that actually made me grateful that the DCEU was coming to an end, which is a real shame. In 13th, we have Suicide Squad, a film that I could feel wasn't shown as intended. I'm not the biggest fan of small characters or side characters suddenly having their own movie, as I feel a lot of the time they don't have enough about them to interest the audience, and this movie is a perfect example of that. Characters felt wasted or dull, and it just led me to being bored. But I could see that there was a story in there somewhere, but unfortunately was cut up quite a bit. However, the highlight of the movie was with Ben Affleck's Batman, as that connected it to the larger universe, but overall was quite a forgettable movie. And then in 12th, The Suicide Squad. Now, I initially ranked this as an 8 out of 10, however that massively dropped on my second viewing. And after thinking about it for a while, I think I know why that view changed. The core story is really good. That is the main thing I really liked. It made sense and had a really good twist. That's what I really liked to my first viewing, and because I enjoyed the story, everything else just worked for my first time seeing it. However, watching it again, I was barely able to focus on the story due to the high intensity of humor, swearing, and gore. The humor just isn't for me. I'm not a fan of that kind of humor, and this movie used way too much of it. And I think jokes become stale after hearing them multiple times, so a movie that has a lot of humor in it loses most of that impact on a second viewing. The humor also is too immature for me, and the mix of the strong language made this movie feel like the dialogue was written by a 14-year-old who hadn't grown up yet but had just discovered swear words. So he used them all the time, but he still was just a kid. So the jokes were extremely immature, but the language was very strong, which made the dialogue feel very out of balance. And if you combine that with the gore, you've got a trio of things that really felt uncomfortable for me. The sheer level of gore felt like it was a glorification of what was going on. I think it's important to show the impact of a weapon being used, but not to the point where it's there for the sake of it. It was like the movie was trying to appeal to kids or teenagers with the humor, but then adults with the language and gore, and that mix just doesn't work for me. If it does for you, then great, but I really feel that trio let the story down because the story was actually very good. And in 11th we have The Flash, a movie that I was actually very excited for, but ended up being very disappointed. The first half of the movie that was set in the main DC timeline was overall very good. We had some cool moments with Batman and The Flash, and it connected me more to those characters, but as soon as it traveled to another universe, the movie went right down the gutter for me. This persistent, irritating humor and heavy reliance on nostalgia made this movie quite dull for someone who didn't grow up with Michael Keaton as their Batman. The action was cool, but the CGI was dreadful, and the movie felt so cut up and changed that I didn't feel like I was actually watching a proper movie, but rather multiple ideas crammed into one. I honestly think they would have been so much better off if they had just gone with the normal Flashpoint story. But then in 10th we have Black Adam. This was a real roller coaster for me. There were elements I really liked, but the execution just damaged that for me. I loved that we had returned to the more serious and badass characters, but it felt like it was done in a way that came across more cheesy than epic. Like they were trying to act tough and brutal, but the acting let that down. But the action really helped the movie out, and so did the return of Superman, but there were many elements that just didn't work. It felt like it was on the right track, but the actual execution of it really let it down. Next, in 9th, we have Shazam 1. Now 8th and 9th could be switched around as they were virtually the same plot, but it comes down to execution, and I think 8th place did it better than Shazam. Now this was where the DCEU's tone really shifted and appealed more to kids than adults who wanted more serious movies. And this is a fun, turn off your brain kind of movie. You don't need to take much seriously, but does a solid job at telling a decent story and showing how a kid would act if he became a superhero. Which is why I actually appreciate the humor this movie had, because it worked for the character used. He's just a kid, so he's gonna be making cocky, immature jokes now that he has powers, and hiding behind a different appearance sells that even more. I guess the only reason why this movie isn't higher up on the list is simply my preference in superhero movies and the superheroes themselves. I prefer the more mature and serious takes to the genre, but I can completely appreciate why people love this movie. And in 8th, the movie that does a better job at telling basically the same story as Shazam is Blue Beetle. Maybe it was because I didn't expect much, but this movie was surprisingly enjoyable. I love the Blue Beetle character and the tech he has, but I also liked how this movie stayed with sad moments. It allowed the audience to be sad rather than making a stupid joke because the director is either too immature to stick with a serious moment or thinks the audience is too immature to handle a serious moment. It meant that it made those sad moments more powerful and fueled the characters to be stronger and braver, which raised the stakes of the story. You could feel the budgets in places, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the family all somehow being comedians, but it was an enjoyable movie. Like Shazam, turn off your brain and just enjoy what is in front of you, and you'll really like this film. Which leads us to 7th place, being Shazam: Fury of the Gods. Now this film once again does have a bit of a generic plot, but I think most superhero movies do now that there is such a high volume of superhero movies out there. But I think this movie did a better job than the first. The scale of this movie felt larger, and I liked that the heroes took the danger of this film more seriously, as that meant I was then able to take the dangerous moments more seriously too. It's not an incredible film, but I think it built upon the foundations of the first movie and added more character development to almost all of the characters in this one. Now, surprisingly in 6th place is Justice League, the 2017 abomination of Snyder's vision, but I still enjoyed this film more than the last 10 movies on this list. I think the overall story was solid, but the execution of the reshoots really let it down. Don't get me wrong, the visuals that were changed and the humor and dialogue added were mostly terrible, but something that really carried this movie for me is that it still includes my favorite DC characters. I can't deny the fact that this movie, including my favorite characters, wouldn't give the film more appeal to me movie over a movie about some small villains or small heroes. All of these movies so far have had major issues for me, but the thing that lifts Justice League over the others are that I care more about the Justice League characters than other characters from the other movies. I haven't read many comics, so I've grown up with seeing the most famous DC characters on screen. So I've built a connection to those characters far more than I ever have with the smaller characters. So Shazam 1 for me is technically a better made movie than Justice League 2017, but I prefer the characters and story in Justice League to Shazam's. Like I said, my rankings today are based on what movies I'd prefer watching to others, and if I had to choose between watching Justice League or any of the last 10 movies on this ranking, I would choose Justice League over all of them. I also really liked the idea of Superman in this film, and I say the idea of Superman in this film rather than just Superman in this film because Cavill's Superman being more hopeful and happy is something I like the idea of, but I felt it was too soon and the execution just didn't work. To be totally honest, it felt like a forced acceleration of this version of Superman, and the way Joss Whedon and Jeff Johns displayed it was extremely poor. I could go on and on about how Justice League 2017 could have been better, but we have 5 other movies to get through. The main point is that the reason why this film is sick is because even though this movie has many flaws, I still think the other 10 movies before this on the rankings have just as many, if not more flaws, but the difference is that I love the Justice League characters, and that accompanied along with a story I still liked, just puts this film above the previous 10. In 5th is Aquaman 1. I thought it did a very good job at showing us Atlantis and Arthur's heritage, and I loved the visuals, and the fights were very unique. This gave us a brand new perspective on the DC universe that we hadn't truly seen before. Being the first superhero movie underwater meant everything felt new and exciting, and that helped me stay engaged throughout the film. I also liked the villains too. Black Manta was on a mission of revenge and felt like a real threat, and Orm was guided down the wrong path, and the conflict between him and Arthur was very enjoyable to see. The only reason it's not further up on the rankings is just because I don't find Aquaman as interesting as the other main DC characters. This film did a fantastic job at making him cooler and more powerful than I realized, but there was really only so much you can do with a character whose powers are only really effective underwater. And then in 4th place we have Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition, a movie that grew on me over time. When I first saw it, I thought it was alright. It was very different to any other superhero film I had seen, and quite sad to see how people were treating Superman, and seeing Superman die was something I didn't want to see happen, especially so early on in the DCEU. However, as time has gone on, I've been able to appreciate more of the movie. I think it's one of the most visually beautiful DC films made, and I really liked what they did with Batman. This was the first time a Batman had actually made me feel the fear that a villain would feel if they saw Batman. My only real issue with the film is Superman. He's supposed to be the brightest light in the room, the optimist, and the one bringing the joy to the movie. But in this film, we didn't really see that as much as I wanted to. I wanted to see more of him talking about the things going on in the movie and being a bit happier. At least at the beginning of the film. I would have loved to have seen more of Superman saving people and seeing him enjoy it. Watching him actually talking to those he saves and connecting to those people. I think that would have really helped build that emotion between the viewer and the character, and would have made his death at the end more impactful. I guess that's the issue when you're having to share the screen with another big character. But for the most part, I did enjoy this movie. The score was phenomenal, the cinematography was stunning, and I think the story really worked for the most part. There were some things I would improve on, but overall, I really do enjoy Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition. But in 3rd place we have Wonder Woman 1, a truly epic origin story that flowed very well. After her introduction in Batman v Superman, this felt like a true backstory to that version of Wonder Woman. Brutal and epic, and a true warrior, which is another reason why I disliked Wonder Woman 1984, because it didn't feel like a true version of this Wonder Woman. But Wonder Woman 1 was very strong. It was a very entertaining movie, however it did feel feel quite a lot like Captain America 1, in a world war where the main hero brings together a small group of men in a pub to help go fight, and the hero even has a shield. That did feel like a bit of a rip-off of Captain America 1, but other than that, I really enjoyed Wonder Woman 1, which is why it takes third place. And in second place is one of my favorite movies of all time, Zack Snyder's Justice League. The true continuation of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and is so epic and so emotional, and because it's 4 hours, I really get to take my time connecting to all those characters. I know the runtime puts some people off, but for me that runtime flies by. It's not a conventional evening movie, it's something you have to take a whole afternoon or evening to watch, but that makes it even more of a special event for me. The connection to the release the Snyder Cut movement and the connection to those characters are what makes this movie even more special. I loved the tone because I think they got a perfect mix of seriousness and humor. Barry Allen was the only real humorous character, which gave the movie a nice balance, but even he was able to take the serious moments seriously, which makes the dangerous moments feel dangerous. And what really helped with that was Steppenwolf. He was a perfect villain. He had a really cool appearance and voice, and his motivations made sense. He was just desperate for Darkseid's approval and did everything he could to try and get that. And I do understand why people don't like the movie or don't appreciate it as much as I do, but the Snyder Cut has a very special place in my heart. I love so much about this movie, but one of my only criticisms is that because it's 4 hours long, I'm not able to watch it as often as I would like to. Like I said when watching it, it feels like an event rather than just chilling in the evening and putting a film on. If somehow there was a way to reduce this film to a 3-hour or 2.5-hour movie, then that would be ideal, but I have no idea how they would possibly be able to do that. I love most things about this movie though. Like I said, it gets the right balance of seriousness and humor, but it's also visually stunning. I think this is the best looking DCEU movie, and I do appreciate the 4:3 aspect ratio that gives it this taller feeling. It gives the movie its own personality, which I love. I also want to give a special mention to the score, because that is beautiful. But the Snyder Cut is not the perfect DC movie, which is why first place is Man of Steel, the very first movie in the DCEU, and is still my favourite of them all. For me, it's the perfect origin story. I love Superman, he's my favourite DC superhero, and I loved this modernised version of the character. I love that he's not the perfect hero right from the beginning, and seeing him be bullied and be emotionally vulnerable throughout his childhood was a very relatable part of his character arc. As a kid, I was bullied, and seeing that bullies were even able to impact Superman as a kid gave me that feeling of not being alone, that even the most powerful and inspirational hero of all time could be bullied as a kid too, and seeing him overcome that and even saving his own bully from drowning is extremely inspirational. I just love almost everything about this movie. The story flowed so well and the flashbacks felt natural and not forced in. The score is one of my favourites of all time, and the villain was really compelling. Zod was so brutal and certain that he was right that he felt like a true threat, and Superman had to treat him as one. Even the humour was done incredibly well. They were very subtle and intelligent moments of humour that didn't detract from any scene, and I just loved that. The action was also the best the DCEU has had. The scale was like no other, and fight scenes were so fast-paced, and I loved that. You felt these beings were more powerful than humans, and the speed they fought at really showed it. This is, without a doubt, my favourite movie of all time, and it will always be one movie that I can watch at any time in my life and always enjoy it. My only criticism of the movie, and it is nitpicking, is that I wish the suit was a bit brighter. I love the colour grading of the movie, but I think it did desaturate the suit quite a bit, and I think it would have been much better if it looked a bit brighter. I don't want it to be the saturation of the Black Adam suit, but just a subtle brighter colour scheme would have complemented the suit and the character a bit more. Other than that, this was the perfect DC movie for me. But that concludes today's rankings. 16 DCEU movies, all ranked from worst to best. Now you've seen my rankings, I want to see yours, so make sure to let me know in the comments below. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I hope to see you here again soon, so until then, have a great day. Bye!